I'm going to try really hard not to spoil the show as it works best if you don't know anything. But if you really want to know, then I've tried to include only very mild spoilers. I recommend you go and watch the show and then come back later. Only Murders in the Building is a 2021 comedy crime drama available now on Disney+. It stars Steve Martin, Martin Short and Selena Gomez as a trio of amateur sleuths living in New York apartment block the Arconia. Over the course of 10, 30-minute episodes we follow the mismatched crew as they use their individual skills to solve the murder of apartment tenant Tim Kono. Writer, Steve Martin, is washed-up Hollywood actor Charles Hayden Savage known for his role as famous TV detective Brazos. Martin Short's Oliver Putnam is an ex-theater director whose last show was a critical and audience flop. And Selena Gomez's Mabel Mora is a 20-something with a very mysterious past. All three serve as executive producers on the show and their characters are all the better for it, each feels like an extension of the actor themselves. Martin is drawing on his time as Clouseau in The Pink Panther and his credit as writer/creator means Charles is definitely the heart of the show. But it is truly an ensemble, each actor brings something very different to the table and their chemistry is integral. The show is at its best when it plays with the conventions of crime drama, it uses comedy to work around cliché and plays with reality as well. Yet this program takes place in one setting, inside the Arconia. This not only ups the tension but minimizes scale, it keeps us grounded in a smaller reality. Allowing us to meet all of the characters and get to know them properly, making everyone a suspect. Recent crime dramas have struggled to keep a consistent level of quality, often the story can't be stretched across 6 hours and it begins to feel bloated, or even worse it fails to stick the landing. Only Murders never falls into this trap, in fact it gets better every week. Episode 7 is probably the best half hour of television I've seen, full stop. Everything about the show is excellent from the supporting cast to the music to the visuals. There is one notable scene towards the beginning of the season when Oliver Putnam envisions the elimination of suspects as a casting callback. The slow pan and scene transition feel distinctly theatrical and within seconds we are drawn into Oliver's world. The show is at its best when it blends fantasy and realism. These flights of fantasy could so easily become style for style's sake but they tell us so much about the characters. Putnam sees everything through the lens of the theater director. He works best when in control and he uses his skills to chronicle the gang's progress with his podcast. The whole investigation feels like a performance with each character filling a role, Oliver the director, Charles the actor and Mabel is probably the writer. Martin Short delivers a gloriously camp performance that never falls into parody. Putnam's bond with his adult son is well written and feels natural, the two feel nicely matched and their history is never as important as the present. Putnam begins the story as a lonely, slightly kooky, old man who relies on his son for help and is subject to a profound and organic character arc. He, like all the characters, is an electric screen presence. He presents himself as unlikable but soon becomes your new favorite wacky uncle. Steve Martin's Charles Hayden Savage seems, at first, to be very similar to Oliver Putnam. Both come from the entertainment business and both are no longer working in it. But after a few episodes we see they have very different outlooks on life. They come from totally different worlds, one is an actor, the other a director. And while neither particularly enjoys being alone, Oliver has become quite satisfied with the company of his dog Winnie. Charles, however, becomes infatuated by January. Jan lives on the other side of the Arconia and in a nod to Rear Window he begins a relationship with her. They perform duets across the courtyard. She being first chair bassoon in a major orchestra and he an amateur accordion player. A romantic plotline between two older characters is not a new idea but it is typically reserved for the best exotic Marigold Hotel. This time the relationship is contrasted with Mabel's similar one but never feels like these are two old people. Instead they are just people. One of my favorite scenes is a very sexually charged game of Scrabble which had me in stitches. Martin balances comedy with pathos at all times. He draws on all forms of comedy and one particular scene towards the end of the series was such an excellent use of slapstick I had to pause and rewind the show, simply because I couldn't stop laughing. You'll know it when you see it. Charles uses the skills he learned as TV detective Brazos to follow the clues surrounding the death of fellow Arconia resident Tim Kono. Martin injects him with a sense of boyish wonderment as the pieces start to fall into place. It is clear that the investigation has given him a new lease of life and he is loving it. The dynamic he shares with Putnam is filled with nuance and the comedic timing from the pair is always on point. I described Selena Gomez's Mabel Mora as the writer in the filmmaking trio. I think that's really rather apt. For a long while she is separated from actor and director, holding all the cards yet revealing very few. We as an audience learn a lot more about her than Charles and Oliver do and for a while she seems like an outlier. Steadily, They all become drawn into this new world. The world of the true crime podcast. Mabel fits into the final form of visual media entertainment, film. As the film writer, she is uncredited, misunderstood, and elusive. But all three move into a new area and have to change. Mabel reveals more of her backstory as she becomes a more prominent feature. Like other writers of long-form content, she becomes a driving force, sometimes overshadowing the director. Oliver has to adapt to faster turnarounds and a new way of directing, and Charles learns to be a voice actor. Maybe I'm reaching for this metaphor, my dad says it makes no sense. But Mabel draws everyone together. She is the only person who knew Kono before he died and so is able to spout factual exposition about him. Mabel is very different from the two old men. She contrasts them in age but also in her actions. They are wildly overexcited children, whilst Gomez delivers every line with a degree of controlled boredom. Her tone hardly ever varies and it becomes very difficult to shock her. Even by the end of the series we still have very little knowledge of her at all. Mabel is vital for the show as she is a connection for the youth watching. Slowly she moves Charles and Oliver into the modern age and in turn she learns from them. Their relationship is organic and fresh, it's not something you see often. These feel like real people and their chemistry is infectious. The supporting cast are also wonderful. The Arconia is populated by a diverse community of people from all walks of life, and yet none of them are defined by their diversity. The homicide detective, beaten down by the fact that a group of amateur podcast listeners have solved her case for her, is also struggling to look after her baby and support her wife. Across the corridor is Oliver's ex-financier and sandwich shop owner Teddy Demas, who lives with his son Theo. In episode 7 of the series we explore the complex relationship Teddy has with Theo. Teddy uses the fact that Theo is deaf to his advantage, never presuming that if he doesn't sign something then Theo will be unable to understand it. Theo has clearly been named for his father and Teddy is angry that his son doesn't live up to the standards he has set. The episode opens with a quite horrifying sequence in which Teddy attempts to make Theo hear a piece of music. It encapsulates Teddy's feelings towards Theo. The whole episode plays out from Theo's perspective, so it is effectively a silent movie. The action is explained through subtitles and text messages, and characters switch from ASL to speech fluidly in mid-conversation. Theo's disability becomes a plot point. It is by no means just a gimmick. The cast are able to show just how expressive facial expressions can be. The constant rumbling sound in the background is designed to create a sense of unease and bring us closer to Theo. There is one moment in which Theo turns to the camera and signs directly to the audience. This effectively shows us that Theo has more control than anyone thinks. He doesn't have to say anything, and we know that he understands the way people pity him, and has an understanding of how to use that. I think what I enjoyed most though was the refreshing way Theo's disability was talked about. The conversations he has are very rarely about being deaf. Instead, they are typical conversations that could be had by any character in the show. The only difference is that they are held in ASL. The only person to have a problem with Theo is Teddy. The episode has other merits too. As I mentioned earlier, there is a silent but sexually charged game of Scrabble. An excellent use of silent comedic tropes, homages to Rear Window, wonderful characterization expressed in silence, and some top-notch sound design. Okay, I've tried so hard to avoid major spoilers up until now, but I'm gonna discuss the ending, so if you haven't seen episode 8 or further yet then look away now. After episode 7 the murder seems pretty much solved, and in a normal series it probably would be. Then in a cruel twist of fate Charles finds his new girlfriend face down on the kitchen floor with a knife in her back. The show leaves you on this cliffhanger. But the next week Jan is healing nicely and will make a full recovery. A lesser series would have done this purely for the shock value. I'm looking at you, Doctor Who, but Only Murders turns this into a key plot point as it is revealed that the suspected murders are not Teddy Demas and Theo, but in fact someone new. The show slowly reintroduces the other Arconia residents, widening the pool of suspects once again. Drawing your eye away from January, turns out Jan killed Tim after he dumped her. She is seriously unhinged and can't cope with rejection. She's been lying about other things too. Charles is left devastated and unable to trust anyone. And then the bombshells keep coming. Mabel is found holding another dead tenant who's been stabbed to death with Mabel's knitting needles. The show is spared the usual happy ending as the final shot is one foreshadowed right the way back in episode 5. The trio visit Tina Fey's rival podcast creator, and in a flash forward she is heard proclaiming that the podcast needs to be renamed Only Murderers in the Building. After the reveal that the Demas and Jan are all murderers, it seems like that has been cleared up. Obviously that's turned on its head as Mabel, Charles and Oliver are marched out of the building in handcuffs. It is fitting that a show which has played with genre convention should do this with its closing moments. It's so great to see a new comedy/drama do so well. especially as it was released weekly and only in half-hour chunks. I'm glad I was there from episode 1. Can't wait for series 2.